Postpartum is hard, y'all, and so is sleep deprivation. And wouldn't you know it, when you have a new baby, you get this great helping of both of those, usually, right? Some well meaning people might tell you that it's a good idea to start sleep training your baby, maybe even early in the newborn phase. But is this really a good idea? And does it even work? That's what we're going to talk about today. It's review time. Today's review comes from Abigail Martin. The headline says, "Just love Lori and her heart for God." My husband and I have been married for almost 2 years now, and we are so looking forward to the time when God blesses us with a baby. Until then, I am trying to learn all that I can to prepare myself for a home birth I so desire. I've never been one to love hospitals due to a few surgeries as a little one and the negative impact they made on me. I've always wanted to please the Lord and do things His way, and the perspective Lori has shared on home birth being pleasing to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ shined a whole new light on this that I'd never thought about before. I have learned so much from her, and I'm so thankful I found this before I'm even pregnant so I can fully invest in the birth I believe God has been curating for me. Thank you so much, Lori, for sharing your knowledge of hospitals, midwives, and home birth. I truly will always be thankful I have stumbled upon your podcast. God is so good. Yes, Abigail, God is so good. I love your name, by the way. My youngest baby is named Abigail. But I just love this review so much because I want to reach people just like you. Sadly, so many of the people that I reach, I'm glad I finally find them, but they've already had their bad experience by the time they find me. And we're just trying to correct things and trying to work through things. But you have found me before you even gotten pregnant. And so that means you have a wide open slate to do things well and to do things differently and to learn all the things that you need to learn. So I'm just so excited that you're here. I hope that at some point you'll hop into the class or maybe even join my coaching program. There's so many ways that we could work together so that you can have an experience that is exactly like what you're dreaming of. So thank you so much for your review. For the rest of you, if you guys have not left me a review yet, what are you waiting on? Hop over on Apple Podcasts and leave me a quick 5-star written review if you would. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps me so much. It encourages me and helps me find other mamas just like you. Or if you don't have an Apple product, if you don't have an iPad or you don't have an iPhone or whatever else, you can get on YouTube totally free. Look at my videos. You can subscribe. You can comment on the videos. Those things do the same thing as leaving a review. They help me find other people like you because the algorithm's like, hey, people like this. And right now I'm fairly new to posting regularly on YouTube. So having you over there would help me to grow faster. So thank you so much. And let's move on to our topic for today, because this one is a tender one, and I totally get it because it's hard when you're exhausted. I mean, anything is hard when you're tired, right? Everything is worse when you're tired. So if you're just trying to figure out how to be a good mom without losing your mind because you are just so tired, you can find yourself in a very vulnerable position. And what led me to do this podcast actually is because I got an email or a message or Instagram DM. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was a mom asking me about if I had an episode on sleep training. And I'm like, no, I don't. And so I decided to do one because she is trying to kind of sort all this out. And she had somebody, or maybe more than one somebody, tell her, hey, you should sleep train your baby. And she was wanting to know if that was a good idea. Many people have tried many things to get their babies to sleep through the night early across history. And let me say, what I'm going to focus on in this episode is going to focus around babies 6 months or less. Past that, there's so many different factors because they're starting to eat beyond just your breast milk or whatever. And developmentally, some things are changing. So I'm focusing on the younger babies. Now, some of this is still going to apply to the older babies, but it's going to have to be up to your discretion beyond that at this point. Hopefully, I'll have a chance to talk about it in the future. But I want you to know that at some point, there may come a time where some gentle training might be okay for older children, but I'm not talking about older children today. I'm talking about little babies. I'm talking about babies who are still relying on your nourishment, your breast milk 100% for their nourishment. And I mean, that makes sense, right? We know that this all really makes sense if you want to get down to it. In fact, even the fact that I got this email shows you that this mom knows that what she's being told doesn't really make all that much sense with what, you know, tends to flows naturally from being a mom. We know that we need a good night's sleep. And we know we need that to function. So it's normal to wonder, does my baby also need to be sleeping through the night? Could my baby sleep through the night? Would this be good for us if my baby was sleeping through the night? But we need to think through, is that how God designed babies to sleep? Because that's really what matters. We want to work with His design. He made us to work the way that a certain ideal way. And we want to work with that, not against that. So, did He design babies to sleep all through the night? So, keep that thought there, okay? And now I want to challenge you a little bit beyond just the developmental needs of a newborn. I want to challenge the psychology behind the thought that your baby should be sleeping through the night and your baby just needs to learn how to self-soothe and how to put itself to sleep. Is it even fair to expect a newborn to do this? A newborn who's completely dependent on you. And I want to frame it this way. Let me ask you this. Where do you find comfort sleeping? Is it in a room by yourself on a cold, hard bed without blankets? Because some doctor said that if you sleep with blankets, you might suffocate yourself. Or is it cuddled up in the arms of your husband, or at the very least in the same bed with your husband? Do you sleep well if you're away from him? If he's away on a trip or you're away on a trip, do you sleep as well? Now, I'm not talking about if your husband snores. Obviously, that's a different situation. I'm talking about for the good sleepers. You, if you're like me, if you're like a lot of moms and women, you want to be in the arms of the one that you love, right? That's where you find comfort. That's where you can relax and breathe. And guess what? Your babies are the same way. Ask you another question. Do you like to cuddle up with your bigger babies if you have them already? Do you like to maybe take a nap with them or cuddle up to watch TV together? If you're upset, do you self-soothe and just deal with it on your own completely? Or do you reach out to a friend, maybe shoot them a text or a confidant for comfort? Think about that. Most of us adults don't really go through stress and hard things alone. We reach out to people who we love, who we know will help us through. So, why is it that we expect brand new babies to be able to cope with things that we can't even cope with ourselves by ourselves? All those things that I just listed, a baby is not ready for that yet. So, how can we expect this baby to do that? How can we expect our babies to be able to calm themselves down and soothe themselves when sometimes we can't calm ourselves down and sometimes we don't want to sleep by ourselves? It's not natural. And you know that because your gut tells you that. You know the things you've heard about sleep training just don't sit well, especially if you've had a baby and you hear those screams. If you've tried to sleep train and you hear those awful screams, you know it's not natural to ignore that. And yet, the world tells you that's what you're supposed to do. So oftentimes that's what you end up trying. The world tells you to fight against the inborn natural tendencies that God put there, the inborn instinct that God put there that drives you to want to care for your baby. But the world tells you to ignore it. The world tells you to do a lot of things that aren't best for you, right? Let me tell you just a little story about my not pregnancies, my early motherhood periods. I was actually the best rested of all the early motherhood period when we were co-sleeping. Now, why is that? Well, see, the thing is, most everybody is going to end up co-sleeping at some point. You may say you're not going to, but you're probably going to do it anyway, and you're just going to do it in a way that's not planned, which makes it less safe. And what do I mean by that? Maybe you get up in the night to go feed your baby wherever you decided you're going to do that, and then you doze off in the chair, and then here you are sleeping in a chair with gaps around you where the baby could slide off and get trapped while you're asleep. There's all kinds of different ways that that's actually unsafe. Chairs and couches and recliners and those kind of things, those aren't safe. But when you arrange your bed in a safe way, co-sleeping is actually really relaxing and it's actually really restful. And that's what I did. See, my babies were tucked right in next to me until they were 10 months old. Now, why did we stop at 10 months? Somehow, all three of them at the age of 10 months did the exact same thing, and that is around 10 months, they started flipping and flopping and kicking and punching. And so no longer was co-sleeping really co-sleeping. It was all co and no sleep. And so that was the point at which we started to move them into their own beds. But up until that point, they were always tucked in right next to me. I would usually wear one of my husband's like button up shirts, the older ones that he didn't wear much anymore, and I would leave the front unbuttoned. So then my arms were always covered. So I didn't have to have covers pulled up on me. And if you're not watching on YouTube, you should, because I'm sitting here doing all kinds of things with my arms to try to illustrate this. So if you haven't hopped over on YouTube, go do that. But it looks kind of silly if you are watching. But just to try to illustrate, I guess, I would have his shirt on, unbuttoned in the front, and then I would have like a t-shirt or a tank top or something on underneath it, so that my arms were covered up and warm without having to have a blanket up over me, and then I could pull the shirt up underneath and latch the baby on, and then pull it back down if I wanted to be covered back up after, if the baby, unlatched after it fell asleep and I was still awake or something like that. Okay, so I had my co-sleeper bed, which seemed like a really great idea, but a co-sleeper bed to a baby is still a bed that's not right next to mama, and my babies didn't like it. I would use it as a changing table, but they would never go to sleep there. I think out of all three babies, I think maybe one baby napped once or twice there out of 30 months worth of the co-sleeping time. So it was good to have there, and it was really nice because it actually straps to the bed so it doesn't wiggle or scoot away from the bed. And there was a little gap, and I shoved pillows down in there, so it was a nice border on that outer edge where I didn't have to worry about the baby falling off if it was on the outside of the bed. But the co-sleeper itself, we never used for actual co-sleeping. I would have my baby on like one of those changing pad type of things, or the bed protector pads. And so it made it really easy because I would just kind of, if I was switching sides and flipping over, I would just lift myself up and just slide that whole pad over, and the baby would just slide over on it to the other side. We roll them over and then latch them on the other side. And so that made it really easy. And my babies also slept in sleep sacks, which are like the things that kind of just like big old sacks that have arms, but then their legs are all loose in there so that they're warm and they're covered up, but that it's not an actual blanket to deal with. And then I didn't have to worry about sheets or covers or anything being up over the blanket. But it was beautiful. The whole thing was beautiful because when my babies would wake to nurse, they usually really didn't fully wake up. They would just kind of stir, and I would latch them back on if needed. And once they got, past a couple months or so, they'd really latch themselves on, and they would nurse and go right back to sleep. And so would I. That's the beauty of it. I would go right back to sleep too. I didn't fully wake up either. I could get the baby latched on and doze right back off. No big lights to be turned on. No walking down the hall to go get the baby. No being startled awake by a baby screaming down the hall. None of that stuff that gets your adrenaline and your cortisol up, that wakes you up and makes it so hard for you to go back to sleep. See, the world tells you that you need to have your baby in its own bed, and you need to have your baby in either in your room or maybe in a room down the hall with a monitor or whatever. Now, as you're hearing all this, I want you to remember all the other things in maternity that the world tells you that are wrong. And you pick up on it there, but in this, you're still getting that confusion. Remember, this is still the world telling you things that are not God's ways. He did not design us as mothers to be separated from our babies that way. So the world tells you to do the things that way. So when you do things that way, let's think through that. When the baby wakes up, you've got to wake up and go get her or go get him. Then once you get to the baby, you get them changed or whatever, you settle in to feed, then you tend to probably doze off anyway because you're still tired. And maybe you doze off and get a little deeper in sleep. You're in that chair or couch I mentioned earlier where it's not safe. So if you can't go to sleep there, well, that means that you have to get up again, right? And put baby back in the bed. Hopefully baby doesn't wake up when you lay the baby down, but there's a good chance he will because there's a startle reflex in the baby's back. And so when you lay the baby down on its back and it senses that you're gone, guess what? He wakes up, right? But if you manage to lay the baby down without falling asleep, now you've still got to you're up again. You got to walk back to your bed, lay back down, get settled again, and try to go back to sleep, which takes a while. And how long is it until the next cry happens? So you're doing this maybe 2, 3 times a night, maybe more. That is not sustainable. that is where that sleep deprivation comes in, that makes you vulnerable to these suggestions that maybe we need to teach our kid to sleep on their own, do some sleep training. But at the same time, you know it's not natural to ignore your baby's cries. You know that. And so ignoring it and hoping they'll go back to sleep, which ends up being part of the sleep training process, only means that neither one of you are going to sleep because your baby's going to be screaming and you're going to know it. So you're not sleeping, hoping that he'll sleep, but then he's not sleeping, wondering where you are. And it's a vicious cycle. So, why do I tell you this here? Because as I head into why it's not a good idea to do sleep training, I want to paint a picture for you that there is a way to do this where you're not exhausted and you don't feel awful and you don't have to fight your natural instinct. You don't have to fight the way that God made you. And you're still working with the way that God made your baby. I don't want to just tell you that you can't do sleep training, deal with it. That's hopeless. And that leads you into depression and sleep deprivation that you can't manage. I want you to know there is a way to do this. So now let's talk a little bit about why it's really just not a good idea to do sleep training. First, waking up for babies is seen as self-protective. And that's an interesting thought because we're all terrified of SIDS, right? We're all terrified that our baby's going to die in its sleep. And I'm not going to go into what I believe are the real causes of SIDS here, but I will say that I do not in any way believe that co-sleeping is one of the causes when it's done safely, like what we just talked about. It's just not. And there's been a large campaign to try to put this on co-sleeping to shift the blame to you so that you feel the blame and the guilt, so that the blame and the guilt aren't placed in the right place, which is not on co-sleeping, okay? So understand that a lot of these campaigns you're seeing about all the back to sleep stuff and all that, that is all there to plant it in your head that maybe it's your fault. And it's not their fault for the things that they're doing to your babies, which I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, hopefully you'll connect the dots through my other podcast. But waking up from time to time, having that lighter sleep for babies is seen as being self-protective because they're not so deep into sleep that maybe they forget to breathe. Now, let's not even go into the fact that babies who are healthy and everything's functioning, they don't just forget to breathe. Babies who haven't had terrible toxins put into their systems, they don't just forget to breathe. But I still wanted to say that it actually is seen as self-protective. There have been studies and things that have revealed that, to where babies waking themselves up is one way they keep themselves aroused enough to stay in that normal breathing cycle. All right. Another one, waking is good for healthy growth and development as well as your milk supply. So babies have really small tummies, especially right at birth. Their tummy is actually the size of their fist. So imagine how small a teeny tiny newborn's fist is. I mean, it's like this big. I'm holding my fingers up if you're looking on the camera. Very small. I mean, if you're looking on YouTube, very small. And it grows fairly quickly in those first few days, but not to something huge. It's just, maybe it goes from being like 1 teaspoon size to maybe like 3 or 4 teaspoon sizes. So that's why they eat so frequently in those times, is because their belly fills up quick and then it empties quick. And so they got to fill it up again quick. And the beauty of that, though, is all of those frequent feedings in those first days when the tummy is so small give your body the stimulation that it needs to realize, hey, it's time to make lots of milk. We have a baby here. And so when you continue those feedings regularly through the night, every 2, 3, 4 hours through the night, you're continuing that stimulation, which is continuing to give your body the signal that it needs to know that it needs to keep making more milk, which gives you a beautiful milk supply. I never had any issues with milk supply or being able to nurse my babies as long as I wanted to. And I always nursed through the night. And most of my clients are the same way. Like that one thing alone, the nursing through the night, the not trying to push it off, the not putting a pacifier in their mouth, all that kind of stuff. Just going with nature, going with the way that God designed these babies, that alone established breastfeeding in such a beautiful way. And there's another thing you need to be aware of, that milk, as you transition into the evening hours and through the night, actually has more melatonin in it. So when that baby nurses, it's getting that melatonin, which is going to help that baby get back to sleep and stay asleep for that next stretch of time. So it's kind of a beautiful system. It's almost like we have an intelligent designer who's put us together, right? Right. He's God and he knew what he was doing. So let's quit fighting with him. Next, letting a young baby cry it out teaches that baby that nobody's coming to help. That's not what we want to teach our babies. We want to teach our babies that we're going to be there for them. We want our babies to know that when something is wrong, we are there. When they are taught that we're not coming because they're crying it out because we're trying to train them to sleep, that destroys that trusting attachment that is healthy, that attachment that God designed to be there. It creates an immense amount of physiological stress for that baby. Nothing about a mother is wired to ignore the cries of her baby. Nothing. And if you've tried to do it before, you know that it hurts to try to ignore your baby's cries. And beyond that, if you have, if you've had a baby before and you've nursed that baby, and then you've either been around another baby or maybe even your own baby when you first heard it cry, when you hear another baby cry or you hear your baby cry, you know that very often that letdown happens in your milk supply. Your milk starts to flow even before the baby is latched on. And that's because mothers are wired to respond to cries. That's an involuntary physiological response that your body will have when it hears any baby cry. But if it's your baby, it's even stronger. God designed you to respond to your baby's cries, not to ignore them. So stop fighting that. And again, the key to all of this, and I'm not going to go much deeper into all the why you shouldn't do it. You know why you shouldn't do it. There's nothing natural about it. But the key to all of it goes back to God's position. Where did God design a baby to be? With its mother, against its mother's body. So let's talk about the key to the right kind of sleep training, and that's co-sleeping. So the position of co-sleeping, the position that's natural for co-sleeping is side lying, and usually it's like a cradling curl up to where like your knees are pulled up, and oftentimes you'll be sleeping like with your arm under your head or maybe tucked under your pillow or whatever. And what that does is it kind of makes your body into a little cocoon that protects your baby. Because even if you are facing towards your husband, you have your knees out and your arms out to where nobody can really get to your baby. Nobody's going to roll over on your baby. And so it's protective in that, in the positioning. Also, a baby who is nursing while they're co-sleeping, their face is near your breast, which is a good distance below where the pillow is. So there's no risk of the baby's face getting up against a pillow. It's in a really good spot. And that's where your baby's going to want to stay because your baby naturally wants to be there. And his or her little legs will curl up and be against your belly, and its head will be against your breast, and it's perfect. Co-sleeping is safe if, let's give you the if list, okay? The things that you need to keep in mind to make sure that your co-sleeping situation is safe. So, like I said, you're usually going to be side lying. You're going to have your baby at your breast, and you're going to be curled up around your baby. I gave you some suggestions earlier about the way I did it, just to make sure your baby's warm enough, not too warm, no blankets are having to be dealt with, all that kind of stuff with the sleep sack. So you can go back and review that. But other things to keep your your co-sleeping situation safe. First of all, you don't need to be on any substances that alter your sobriety in any way. This means alcohol, drugs, or medications, even if they're prescription medications. If they alter your sobriety, meaning you're not as easy to wake up and things like that, you do not need to be co-sleeping. You cannot be a smoker and co-sleep. Something about that smoking thing causes your brain to do kind of the same things as what I was just talking about. It alters your arousal. You really don't need to be obese and co-sleep. And I kind of go back and forth on this one because I still believe that maternal instinct is real enough to where even if you are obese, that it's not going to be a problem. But in general, that's just seen as a safety thing because obviously if you're obese, you have more tissue that's away from your body, well, not away from your body, but away from your head, to where you might not notice as much or hear as much if your baby is struggling. Again, I don't really know if that one needs to be on the list or not. I've just seen it in a lot of places, so I didn't want to leave it out, but um, it is what it is. You just don't want your baby to be able to be covered up by any of that adipose tissue. This next one is also one of those, yeah, maybe keeping your baby on the side away from your husband. I didn't always do that. My husband somehow had this instinct to stay away from a baby as well. And also, if you're curled up, like what I mentioned before, your husband's not going to be able to get over on your baby either. It's just that the reason this one's there is because husbands, men in general, they don't have the same instincts that we do. And I don't say that to be derogatory at all. It's just not how God made them. And so they don't have that same instinct to arouse and protect their baby the way that you do. So keeping them away from to where they're not right up against the husband so that the husband doesn't end up like rolling back over on the baby and mashing them or anything like that. Again, I really think most husbands will wake up if that happened and recognize it, but this is just one of those things you usually see, is to keep the baby away from the person you're sleeping with. Also, you want to make sure you don't have any risk of falling. The baby doesn't have any risk of falling, that is. And so, like I mentioned earlier, I used the co-sleeper for that purpose. It was kind of like a border on the outside of the bed so the baby could not fall off of the bed. And of course, if the baby's in the middle, it's not going to fall off. So the middle is usually a good place, but then that sets you up with having your husband on the other side. So, there's a little trade-off there. And make sure your mattress isn't too soft to where they can't really sink down into it. Most of them aren't like that, to where they're so soft to where it would put your baby in danger. And then keeping sheets and pillows and things like that away from the baby's face, which again, if you do sleep sacks and that kind of thing, not going to usually be a problem. So those are just some tips to keep things safe because, like I said, you're likely going to co-sleep whether you plan to or not. It's just you're going to end up co-sleeping in the recliner or in a chair or on the couch, and then that's actually where it's not safe. So go ahead and take the steps to plan to have your bed be a safe place to sleep for your baby so that when your baby's born, you're not sleep deprived and you don't have to worry about all this stuff about sleep training. You can just have your baby with you the way God designed it. Now, believe it or not, I've told you about my course for a long time now, but believe it or not, we actually talk about co-sleeping in that course because, as I told you, we cover everything in there. We cover everything from preconception all the way through newborn care. So this is actually in there, among other things, and with maybe a little bit more depth. I mean, I did tell you we cover everything under the sun, right? I told you that, and I wasn't kidding. We cover everything you need to know. So I hope that you'll join us over there because I want you to have the most prepared pregnancy and birth that you can possibly have, and motherhood. I don't want you having to kind of wing it and just get whatever information you can get off of TikTok or Instagram or whoever just happens to put something up on the interwebs. You need something from somebody you can trust. So I hope you'll head over there. You can find it at go.yourbirthgodsway.com/CEC. Or if you want to try out the first module for free for 7 days, you can do that as well. That's at go.yourbirthgodsway.com/course free trial. Hope that helps you, and I hope to see you back here next week.